Hey, so I just finished playing Final Fantasy 15, all the way through to the end, so it is completed. And I just wanted to post my thoughts about it. So here is a little review of Final Fantasy 15, according to me. So the first thing that I would critique about the game is that they're always trying to come up with, every Final Fantasy game is always kind of like relies on a lot of staples from the series, but then also tries to create a new experience. And a big part of that new experience is supposed to be the storyline. Like, the storyline is supposed to be totally unique. But, and I'll get more into it with some of the other things, my other criticisms, Final Fantasy 15 is full of unoriginal ideas. Almost the entire game, actually, when you start to break it down, is copied from previous Final Fantasy titles. So just to give a couple of examples, and I'll go in chronological order. At some point, the entire world is destroyed. The bad guy gets his way, and the world is destroyed, and they even use the same phrase, World of Ruin, which is from Final Fantasy VI, which is exactly what happens. And if you want to talk about other overlaps, at one point they call the guy the Jester, which would be a weird reference to Kafka, who was in Final Fantasy VI, who actually destroyed the world and created the World of Ruin. Along with that, when it happens, the world becomes populated with all these really, really, really powerful monsters called demons. And Final Fantasy VIII actually basically did that. Now, spoiler alert, you were warned. Killing the main female lead, Final Fantasy VII. Also, having a character who realizes that they were basically manufactured or that they were created, and then having an existential crisis about that, Final Fantasy IX. But Vivi, being a cute little black mage with a hat and basically nothing but a pair of eyes blinging out from underneath, actually was more of a character and more believable than any of the characters in Final Fantasy 15. And I'll get more into that in a second. The main female character being the hope to save, or the key to saving the whole world, Final Fantasy X, Yuna. And lastly, the whole concept, the way the game plays out, is really kind of styled after the MMO concept, with like picking up missions and going on hunting quests, and that was Final Fantasy XII. So even just starting off, you can see how many ideas are really just repeats from previous things and have been borrowed from other places. And that gets me into my next criticism, which is that the game is really repetitive. And what I mean by that, not just the quests and the hunting and the stuff that you're doing, but the characters are really flat. First off, there's like 6 women in the entire world. Did anybody else notice that? It's kind of weird. Your main party consists of 4 guys and is basically the same 4 guys through the entire game. So it's already a huge sausage fest. Now, they said that this was supposed to be because it was a game about male bonding and the forging of friendships. But, again, really flat one-dimensional characters. So yeah, it's kind of cute when like Ignis learns how to cook something new and Gladio says for the first time, I can taste test for you. Like, that's kind of funny, and like that's kind of neat because it gives us a little insight into the characters. But after about the 20th time he says this exact same thing, it becomes painfully repetitive. And the same thing is true. What you mistake, or what they mistook for like character development, is really just a bunch of like quips and like joshing around between bros, and it already has like a disgustingly fratish, bro-ish feel to it already. And this is coming from a gay man. Like, this is really, really hard to swallow. Like, and the characters, again, they never, ever get truly developed. You never actually care about these characters. They have almost no personality, aside from these little one-liners and these little quips and like these kind of like back and forth, kind of like shoving buddies. But that's not real character. Like, that's not character development. That's not actually developing the character or presenting the character or making them worthwhile or making me care about them. And because there's only so many possibilities, apparently, they start to repeat themselves over and over again. And then it just becomes annoying. Like, do they not have anything else to say? Which leads me into my last and my largest criticism of the game, is that it's just boring. It's boring. There's so many points in the game that just are not interesting. The biggest one, of course, being having to drive everywhere. So because they wanted this massive open world, which they got, but in order to travel from place to place, if you've previously been there, and we won't talk about how horrible the interface is with that, but to travel from place to place, you either have to pay money to fast travel and sit and wait through a loading screen, or you have to hop into your handy-dandy car and drive there. And this can take like several real-world minutes. So you have to sit there with like your phone nearby or like a magazine to read, because as your characters are driving, the only thing to entertain you is either to cycle through songs on your in-game CD player, because your car is equipped with, MP3, or to look at something else and do something else in the real world while you're waiting. Now, the argument initially was, well, you're supposed to be like taking in the landscape. It's so beautiful, and how huge and open the world that they made is, and like you're supposed to be like looking at everything and looking for opportunities to like jump out of the car and like go do stuff. But those opportunities are few and far between, and they're repetitive. Oh my gosh, there's another guy broken down on the side of the road. I better jump out and give him a repair kit so that he can fix his car. Or, oh, there's somebody that's lost. I need to go help them. And those become repetitive. The landscape itself is repetitive. So even they say, oh, it's this big, vast open world, but it really falls into like 3 or 4 regions that look all the same throughout. So the first region is like this deserty kind of scrub brush area. And then at some point there's like a forested area, and then there's like this rivers and grasslands type area. And everything within those different regions looks exactly the same. So it's not really all that much to take in. And again, it gets really boring after a while. And that was really my ultimate criticism of the game, is that throughout the whole thing, it's just so repetitive. And no point did I ever really start to care about these characters. Like, I really did not care what happened to any of them, because none of them had anything about them that made them particularly interesting or made me want to support them. Everything that happened was really predictable. Like, you're like, so this is going to happen next. And, and again, all of the ideas were mostly borrowed. Now, I am not a fan of the MMO style for Final Fantasy games. Like, Final Fantasy 12 was my least favorite that I've ever played, and this would probably tie up there with it for that spot, and for a lot of the same reasons. The other thing is that at the very end of the game, there's a huge difficulty spike that you are not prepared for, because through most of the game, you can pretty much just keep advancing the storyline by doing the main quests. Now you're supposed to stop and take time to do other stuff, but even with doing that, I got to the end of the game in 35 hours. Typically, Final Fantasy games are like 60. I was only level, I think, 45, and all of a sudden there was a huge difficulty spike at the end of the game that you're unprepared for. Because the rest of the game isn't really paced out correctly in a way that makes you feel like you need to go and do these other things. And there becomes a point several chapters prior to the end of the game where you kind of get on a one-way track, literally a train, and you cannot go back. And then it's just storyline. There's no point, once you reach a certain level or a certain point in the story, there's no point for you to diverge. You're not allowed to go out of and do other things. So you don't have the ability to go back and level up more and do other side quests and stuff. And I think that was really weird, because you spent so much time emphasizing the openness of the world, but then the last like third or quarter of the game, you put them on a one-way track and they can't divert from anymore. And and then you lock them in, and even though all of the rest of the main quests leading up to that point have been relatively easy, the last couple all of a sudden seem super hard. So it was just really weird pacing to me, and maybe I'm just missing something. But my other criticisms, I think, are really legitimate. So I'm going to post this on my Facebook and maybe my YouTube, but hopefully people will leave comments below and let me know what they thought as well of Final Fantasy 15.